I'd love to make it your way. How long have that would be fantastic actually, because I've never been anywhere near Malaysia or any of those. I mean, like even India is a place I've never been to. But I mean, Southeast Asia, all that. I mean, how long have you? Because you went to school in the States, right?
Yeah, I did. So, I mean, I have a somewhat complicated story where my mom is from one place, my dad is from another place, and I grew up in a third place. My dad's family is Malaysian originally, and so I ended up moving back here some years ago. And actually, that's how the podcast started because when I moved here in 2011, I discovered that there was this very underground but very passionate metal scene that very few people knew about, and so I started the podcast as a way to promote the metal scene here and throughout Southeast Asia. And so, in terms of playing here, yeah, there's absolutely an audience who would love to see you and love to see Cynic as well. I think the major stumbling block is the distance, just because of the cost of living and the standard of living throughout most of Southeast Asia is much lower than in the West, and so promoters here don't have the same kind of capital, I guess, or funds to bring bands over. Just because long flights, and if you're talking about a 5-piece band, you're talking about 5 different flights. So usually, what happens is if a band has announced a tour nearby, like in Japan or Australia, promoters from the region will reach out to them and try to piggyback off that tour and bring them from a closer part of the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So
So
are you in Kuala Lumpur or
yeah,
where?
yeah, exactly. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, and I do have friends who book tours and things like that. So I can put you in touch with some people if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean,
So
absolutely.
it's yeah,
Especially if I get kind of, I would love that. I mean, I'd just love to do some traveling and just explore as well. So it's one of those things where you can combine it with some gigs. That's the best case scenario.
yeah,
Um, so
100%.
you're based there now, huh? Just kind of that's home, and you're just kind of in the scene, and
Yeah, for the near future. I mean, right now, I'm not as involved in the scene as I used to be, just because, I turned 40 earlier this year. And, I was already kind of losing my interest in catching stage divers and getting kicked in the face and stuff like that. And so, kind of what you're talking about in terms of Cynic playing and, people just checking out the gear and seeing what the guitarist is doing and how exactly he's playing that riff. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm not moshing, I'm not dancing, I'm not, I'm kind of standing in the front, watching intently and making observations.
yeah, that's that's where it goes eventually. Yeah, I mean and especially, I mean, it depends on the band, but even as you get older, even witnessing a heavy band, you just don't have that drive to participate physically anymore, probably. That's really cool. But is this podcast like, so this is more about just participating in the scene and being a voice in the community kind of thing?
More or less. I mean, to be honest with you, actually, I hit the 100th episode about a month back, and that was supposed to be it. Originally, just because I was so focused on Southeast Asia, I was just going to do one episode per country, and in the spirit of those old comps like Scandinavian Metal Attack, that that was the first time anybody had heard from Bathory, or some of the early like splits where Sepultura was introduced to the world. That's kind of what I was hoping to do. Just introduce people to music from around Southeast Asia and the different kinds of metal bands, and hoping people would take an interest. And then kind of ran out of steam after 8 or so episodes, just because there's only so many times you can interview your friends. Do you know what I mean? And so we do have some bands who tour through Southeast Asia in the manner that I was describing, where people would reach out to them if they were doing an Australian tour and manage to bring them over here. And, so we get a pretty eclectic mix of bands where, to my knowledge, Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and bands like that have never played in Malaysia. But we did get this band called Mo, who all went to music school and play this strange kind of noise rock where the main person from that band had never played rock music before. She came from like a improvisational jazz background and somehow ended up making this really heavy music. So I would interview bands like that who would end up in Malaysia and speak to them about their music. And the podcast grew that way. And like I said, I ran into Jason and spoke to him about Cynic. Earlier this year, I actually just started doing interviews like this one over Skype. And so that opened up a whole new world for me where, I don't have to hope or wait for someone to come through the country. I can actually just, reach out to them.
Yeah. Yeah. The beauty of the internet.
Yeah. So in terms of why I'm doing this, I really don't know. I set a goal for doing 100 episodes, and I reached 100 episodes, and I was like, all right, that's it. Time to find something else. And then a band that I had met and was somewhat familiar with put out a new album, and almost without thinking about it, I reached out to them and said, hey, do you want to do an interview? And then I realized, okay, well, I guess we're going to do more than 100 episodes, and I'm not really sure what the next goal is, but it's a relatively... The investment is time. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't have a lot of expensive equipment. All the interviews are done over the internet. And so I guess as long as the time commitment doesn't eat into anything else, I'll keep doing it until, I don't know, maybe 1,000 episodes. And it gives me an opportunity to speak with people like you who, I've been listening to your music for probably more than 20 years at this point. And, I'm more interested in the songwriting process and kind of how these things get made, basically, if that makes sense.
That's really exciting. Yeah, you have a background in art and whatnot, so that you have a different level of curiosity, I think, than what's rooted in. I mean, I have to say it's been a pleasure speaking with you because you although you might not consider yourself a journalist, your background lends itself to doing a more interesting interview and more interesting questions than, you know what I mean? You have a wave of people right now that just decide they want to have a podcast or have a zine, and they're not really are that educated, in that world or something, and they just a lot of times it doesn't work so well, I think, and it's helpful, I think, when you're speaking to people who seemingly know what they're talking about and have done some homework, and are actually genuinely interested in what they're writing or doing a podcast about. Do you do like transcriptions as well, or is it just a live?
In the early days, I would do transcriptions, but it was such a time commitment to do it, and it ends up being fairly tedious. So now it's just the audio podcast. But I do like a Q&A, because the blog, a lot of the interviews are written Q&As. I'll often just fire off questions to bands and have them, email me back the responses, like the traditional zine style.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's great. That's exciting. And but your work, you're not doing this for a living, right? You're doing other.
No. So by trade, I'm a graphic designer and a creative director, and I do a lot of motion graphics and design work and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's the other part of it. So much of my job is kind of this very bland, very uninspired corporate stuff where it's you put the logo, you put the text, and so this is an outlet for me to kind of be who I really am.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it keeps you kind of in touch with your passions, your kind of your interests outside of this work that pays the bills and has you make a living. It's so tricky kind of turning the passion stuff into a living. Like it's such a precarious and luck based situation, but that's really exciting. I mean, podcasts really are just at the tip of the iceberg. There's so much potential with them, and I like the name of your I think that's why I even like first responded. I was like, you said the name, I was like, oh, this guy must be cool.
It's funny, especially because in Malaysia, English is only spoken on a limited basis. And so a lot of people had a very hard time with the name of the podcast just because they didn't see the paradox. They didn't understand what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
I'm an evolutionary sleeper, an